Hello, Tom Maguire. So I just want to do a quick review on The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. So this was a real pleasant surprise for me, this book. I didn't read this one. I listened to it on Audible. It came up on my Audible recommendations and I thought, yeah, I'll give that a go. It's been a little while since I've read a book on money. I've read quite a few books on money over the past few years, some really good ones, some less good ones. I won't list them here. I haven't reviewed all of them, but I probably will get around to reviewing some of them at some point. But this one, I would have to say, out of the, how many have I read probably? I've probably read about 10 in total, I suppose, that are very specifically kind of about money and sort of investing and that sort of thing, sort of similar to this book, I guess. And this is the best one, as far as I'm concerned. So Morgan Housel he doesn't kind of try to brainwash us with this idea that money is really, really important. And he just talks about, it's just a really sensible, important message around making sure that we don't get obsessed with buying silly things, that we don't compare ourselves to other people, to try and play up with other people, to try and keep up with other people, to invest safely and reasonably in the future, to just put certain amounts of money away, to get into that kind of mindset where we are just saving up for the future. And he says, get out of the habit of kind of saving for things. Don't save for something big or something that you want in the near future. Just save for the sake of saving, because you never really know what's going to happen in the future where you might need a certain lump of money, a certain sum of money. So he says that's kind of, for me, that was kind of the biggest mindset thing, really, the biggest kind of game changer in there, was just save for the sake of saving. I know we've heard this before in different books. They say about paying yourself first and things, and making sure you save and you invest. And he's just basically saying, don't become too obsessed with kind of investing as well. You don't necessarily have to go with the highest interest necessarily, but just invest enough that you're kind of ticking over, that you are just kind of compounding money. And again, that's something that we get told lots if you're into personal development. And I think money is really closely linked to personal development. I think it's something that most people find quite complicated. I include myself in that. If you've never done any kind of learning around money, we don't get taught anything in school about money. Parents often don't tell us very much really about money, other than the basics of kind of living within your means, the sort of things that depress you when you're a kid. Don't spend money on nice things. Okay, well, that's kind of like the worst thing you can be told, really, because the first thing you want to do is spend money on nice things. So but once you get into personal development and you realize how important, and you realize how you can be happy without having silly materialistic things. Actually, there's happiness to be had in just kind of saving and securing your future to a certain extent, but living life as well within your means. And there's a perfect example of this guy called Ronald Read. If you haven't heard of Ronald Read, please look him up. He's really worth looking into. He's so interesting. He's a guy who was a janitor in America. No one knew anything about him. He dressed very kind of modestly. He enjoyed coffee at the local hospital cafe, and he died at about 90, I'll put it in afterwards, 90 something. He was in his 90s, and he died worth $8 million, and he never earned more than, I suppose, just over minimum wage, whatever it is a janitor gets paid. Can't have been any more than the equivalent of about £15,000 or whatever that is in dollars per year, I shouldn't imagine. And he died worth $8 million, and he left a load of it to charity, and I think he left some of it to his family, or to whoever he wanted to. Basically, that's kind of the point. And he did that by just investing his money. Every time he got paid, he would just live as cheaply and frugally as possible. He invested his money in the stock market, in index funds, and his money went up and up and up. And he lived long enough so that he'd had the complete and utter kind of benefit of compounding. The years went by, and very wealthy man. And you might say, well, what's someone who isn't very kind of, I suppose, doesn't have a very good understanding of personal development would probably say, well, what's the point in that? He died having not spent anything. He didn't enjoy his money. Well, actually, who's to say he wasn't happy living a modest life of just kind of seeing people in the cafe, investing his money, enjoying seeing it grow, doing a job that actually maybe gave him a certain amount of satisfaction, God forbid, because maybe actually he quite enjoyed serving people and actually helping and playing his part in society, doing something physical. And maybe he also felt quite good about the fact that he was going to leave a significant amount of money to charities that he felt were quite important. So actually the knowledge that he was going to die doing some good, having an impact, maybe he knew that he was going to go down and kind of be fairly famous for it as well. Maybe that gave him a certain amount of a buzz. Maybe it didn't. Maybe he wasn't interested in that. But I think the point is, we get so obsessed, we're so brainwashed that we have to have certain things. We have to have certain cars and houses and clothes and holidays, and we have to compete with our neighbours. But actually, when you look at people like him, you realise that it isn't really that natural to think like that necessarily. It's kind of brainwashing and conditioning. And actually, what a great example that is. What a great example he is, I think, of how you can, if you want to, become quite wealthy, even on, a very minimal income. You don't have to fall prey to all the brainwashing and the marketing and the adverts and all that stuff. You can actually choose a different path if you want to, and I think that's really inspiring. And I just think that was a really good story, really good true story to use in this book. But it's just a really interesting book. It flows really easily. I didn't read it; I listened to it on Audible, but it was really easy to get through. It was interesting right from the off. There were no dry bits, which is unusual for a book on money as far as I'm concerned. I do find money books quite interesting, to be fair, but this one just kept flowing really nicely. It was done really well, written really well, real nice conversational style, bringing in really interesting stories. He mentions other authors like Frederick Lewis Allen, who he considers, I think he says, is his favourite historian. He wrote Since Yesterday, the 1930s in America, when America was really booming and richer than anywhere else. He talks about the dangers of not having enough, and sort of talks about Warren Buffett saying how stupid it is that people will risk things that they want or things that they need for things that they don't necessarily need, and how that risk is just really quite foolish. So he also mentions Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, and I can't remember the exact quote, but there was someone who said that they were richer than him, or someone asked Joseph Heller how he felt about someone being richer than him or something for whatever reason, and he basically said, I have something he'll never have, which is enough. And it's like, that's completely the point, isn't it? When is enough enough? And if you're someone who feels as though enough is never enough, and you want more and more and more, you can be Jeff Bezos, you can be worth 100 billion or whatever it is he's worth now. But if you're not satisfied with that, in some ways that's good because you're driven to keep going. But if you're not happy in your dissatisfaction, then what is the point? Whereas if you're someone else who's made $1 million, couple of million, few 100,000, you've got enough to live the rest of your life comfortably, and you're happy with that, like the guy Ronald Read, for example, then that's success as far as I'm concerned. You don't have to have huge numbers necessarily. He basically talks about how it's important to have a survival mentality with money, really, in some ways, which kind of sounds as though that's quite negative, but he's basically just kind of saying, save for the future, don't waste money on silly things, put it away, store it away to a certain extent. And I know people who have done that, and they've done very well from it. So, but it depends. You've got to have the right mentality as well, haven't you? If you constantly feel as though things are going to be taken away from you, you're going to live quite an anxious life. But I think it's sensible to have that mentality to a certain extent. He talks about a book called The Sense of Wellbeing in America by Angus Campbell. And in his book, I've probably mentioned this before in other reviews, but in his book, he talks about how control over life is the biggest factor in happiness. And this was a study he did, I think, in America. And yeah, control over life, isn't that just so important? Whenever I've been really unhappy in a job, it hasn't necessarily been about the money I've been getting paid. It's been about the lack of control that I felt. You have to be somewhere by a certain time. You have to be around people you don't want to be around. You have to be there until you're told you can go on your break or what have you. You stay until you're allowed to go home. That control is taken away from you, and it's that feeling of having no control that causes unhappiness and depression in people when they're in the wrong job, I think. Since I've worked for myself, I feel so much better, so much happier. I've got control, even though there's stress and pressure about things, going bad potentially. I still have control. It's down to me to put the work in. It's down to me to put the time in. There's no one kind of standing over me, sort of bullying me. It's down to me to do that. And I think control, having a sense of control, and the best companies will give people a sense of control to a certain extent because they're far more likely to keep staff that way. So that's really, really important. That's a real big thing. Something that he talks about as well, he says that wealth is hidden, but richness is obvious and shown. So rich people kind of show their wealth. They drive around in their Ferraris and they dress in a certain way. Wealthy people tend to just kind of have stuff going on in the background. They might have a few properties, they might have a business going on. They don't necessarily shout about it. They drive a more modest car, they invest their money, and that's really interesting. I think that's really true. He mentions the Wright brothers and stuff, and how when they invented flight, how no one had any belief in that happening whatsoever, and then suddenly they just took off and it went, and it's become the biggest, possibly the biggest thing ever in human history in terms of changing things. And he just talks about stories being the most powerful force in the economy as well. So when people say something negative, we're far more likely to listen. So someone says, stock market's about to crash, this person's about to go under, or this company's about to go under. We hear that much more than the positive stuff, don't we? We hear the negative news all the time. But there's loads of stuff in this book. I'm not going to kind of go on for too long because I'm already over nearly 12 minutes now. So, but yeah, I just found it really interesting, really easy to listen to. If you want a good book on money, I can't recommend this one enough. It's fantastic, The Psychology of Money. And it surprised me because, again, the cover didn't look anything particularly interesting. The title was a little bit boring, The Psychology of Money. But it's really, really good. Highly recommend it. Please follow me on Facebook, Facebook, TikTok and Instagram at Maguire Total Coaching, where I'm basically passionate about personal development and reading and getting the best possible advice from the world of personal development out there to as many people as possible. I want to help people. I want to share the knowledge that I've learned. I want to improve my own knowledge as well at the same time. It's all about the journey. Please like and subscribe. I really appreciate that. My subscribers seem to be going up at the minute, which is really nice. I do these reviews because I want my kids to look back and have an idea of the stuff that I read and make their own minds up, and also to have a bit of a laugh at me looking back. But I want to help people as well. So please like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Look forward to speaking again soon. Cheers.